Hello.
Hi. Page 197 of In Search of Christian Freedom, Ray Franz has been discussing heavy loads. Why are they heavy? Particularly heavy for Jehovah's Witnesses. Here the subhead is Expressions of Trusted Active Elders. On February 10, 1978, the Service Department Committee sent out letters to a number of respected elders in different parts of the United States. They were asked to comment on certain questions, including the effect of existing field service arrangements. Some of these men had been traveling representatives, that is, circuit and district overseers of the organization, but they were now family men, and interest was expressed in hearing how they saw matters in their current situation. In many cases, their comments were such as most of Jehovah's Witnesses would hesitate to voice, except to trusted friends, lest they be labeled as unspiritual or disloyal. I'm quite sure that if these particular men had not been invited to express their viewpoint by the service department, they too would have been very hesitant to do so.
One elder in a northeastern state, formerly a member of the headquarters staff, replying to the service department's inquiry, included this statement about the use of a report slip. Quote, "Many brothers really resent the time reporting requirement, which turns a very personal act of worship into a tedious organization routine. If any are engaged in door-to-door activity or other activity merely to turn in time, then the report is probably not worth the paper it is written on. If the publisher is engaging in the service because of his love for Jehovah and the sheep, and for the joy he gets from this personal act of worship, then he will surely continue to do it without the reporting prod. If we are supporting a certain number of publishers due to the reporting prod, then of what value really is the report? If we discontinued the reporting of time and found that many quit the field service, one must ask how honest and useful this service in this regard was in the first place."
And that's the end of the quote from the brother.
Mm-hmm.
Another reply, Ray says, came from an elder in a southern state. As a youth, he had pioneered during each high school vacation, had entered Bethel service upon graduation at the age of 16. Upon leaving, immediately went into pioneer service, then special pioneer service, became a circuit overseer, and later a district overseer. And at the time of writing, did substitute circuit work for the organization. As he says, by all standards, I would be considered a field man. The field to me is easier than rolling up my sleeves and tackling the many exhausting problems we have. Now a father of 2 children, he wrote, and this is the direct quote, "A large number of publishers, that is witnesses, I know, express themselves as constantly feeling guilty that they are not doing more in field activity. Many fine Christians who likely are doing all they can realistically live in abject guilt. They find little joy in their lives. Service has been made so complex, so highly structured and organized that many feel they are not serving God unless they go to a meeting for service, knock on doors with a sermon, yes, sermon, he says, and place literature. Success is still measured in numbers because of the reporting system, despite all contrary efforts. With the mental impression that service must be highly structured, overlooked is the natural and rewarding avenue of service, informal witnessing in one's daily life and/or calls on persons one knows. Just talking about the kingdom is somehow not viewed as real or true service to our brothers as a whole. Simplicity is overlooked. More and more publishers are questioning the rationale for the publisher's record card, and in recent years I find it harder and harder to defend scripturally. One must admit it has produced a host of deeply rooted problems. To a large extent, the hours placement yardstick of Christianity is still set forth by traveling overseers who are almost exclusively field service oriented. We can get publishers into the field by hand-holding, a little pressure, a little cajoling, or appeal to guilt feelings, yet long, hard experience tells us this does not make them spiritually strong.
And that's the end of his quote. Equally revealing is this portion of the response of an elder in St. Paul, Minnesota, who wrote, quote, "Another problem that exists but is not openly discussed is the view the brothers in general have toward traveling overseers and those at Bethel, the international headquarters. Since I served in circuit work for a number of years and now serve as an elder in one congregation, I have seen both sides. But there are very strong feelings that the traveling overseers and Bethel brothers, including the governing body, do not understand the problems of the average person in the organization. It is felt that these brothers are sheltered and that the decisions are being made by men who are not truly aware of the problem. Strong feelings exist that such brothers have everything given to them, do not work for a living, do not know what is going on, etc. The struggle for them, for making a living, is a tremendous burden on the brothers, and what is given as advice is not taken as spiritually refreshing, but is taken as advice from an organization that has men sitting at Bethel who are not realistic and who cannot appreciate the pressures of everyday life because they do not have such pressures. Again, this type of thing is not openly discussed, but it is there." And that's the end of his quote.
Well, this is very real because witnesses don't often think of this. Certainly, I don't think the governing body thinks about it. They live a bubbled existence. All the full-time workers at the Bethels throughout the world live a bubbled existence compared even to the local elders and the pioneers.
Yeah, so even though they are not without an income, a small allowance, it's still a sure thing, and they're sheltered from the the daily living stuff that a pioneer might have to do, which is struggle to make a living, keep a job, have enough money, bills and expenses that would not be there for a Bethelite.
Yeah.
Somebody else is doing the laundry, somebody else is paying the bills. So it is a different kind of a life. It's got, I'm sure, other pressures, but you can see how there would be
resentment.
Yeah, or just feeling they don't really understand.
Yeah.
What they're asking me to do because they live differently.
And in this, ironically, they're more like what they criticize than they realize. One of the standard criticisms of Christendom is that you've got a paid clergy. There's no clergy-laity. Well, there is in the Watchtower.
Yeah.
Very plainly, there's full-time workers who are given a pittance, it's true, but they have a guaranteed house and sustenance.
And care, medical care, all of that is provided for.
So you have a full-time clergy who are, yes, separated, segregated from the rest of the Jehovah's Witness population in a way that is not the same as clergy-laity in Christendom, because that varies too.
Yeah.
The Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Catholic, etc.
Where
There's
they
all
are,
kinds of variations.
The community they serve, if they're poor, they're not going to be rich.
But this is more like the Old Testament, where the Levites and the tribe of Levi are completely segregated from the rest of Israel. The priesthood, the Aaronites within the Levites, they're segregated even from their fellow Levites. But the Levites are separated from all the daily grind of the other 11 tribes of Israel, who have to work their land and do all the stuff that most people do in the Gentile world. But there is another problem here, namely that the governing body of the early church, well, let's take Paul for an example, worked for a living. He supported himself.
He set the example so that he could be more like them, like the people he was counseling.
And yet Paul said, at least twice that I can remember, the worker is worthy of his wage. This is what Christ said. Paul illustrated it from the Torah by saying you shouldn't muzzle an ox when it is threshing out the grain.
Yeah.
So he's saying that Christians should take on the obligation of supporting financially
Yeah.
their
Just like
their
Israel.
shepherds.
Israel supported the priesthood because they were devoting themselves to their spiritual welfare. So it was
Their
only
full-time job.
right that they be supported so that they could do the job they were given.
So even though Paul supported the principle of remunerating those who are shepherding you,
Yeah.
to take away the care that they would otherwise have to
Yeah.
have,
He says he had a right to it.
he had a right to it, but he didn't exercise it.
Yeah.
He worked with his hands at the kind of trade. I'll get into that a little bit more in the next segment, maybe. The kind of a trade that a Jewish rabbi would have to
Yeah.
learn in order to support himself, because he couldn't count on being supported by those that he was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So in the next segment, we have more input from experienced brothers who don't agree with the policy, the continual pressure put on the brothers to put in reports